Want Congress to come back into session really now and vote on authorizing these airstrikes that have already begun.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something where Congress should express its voice. The president, under Article 2, arguably has the authority to defend the nation and take these strikes, but under the War Powers Resolution, there's a limit on that, a 60-day limit. Look, Congress ought to act. I think it's pretty widely accepted, maybe not every member of Congress, but the overwhelming majority of them think that we have to act against ISIL, and not just in Iraq, but in Syria. To do that, there ought to be an authorization for the use of military force, and the United States Congress ought to come together and pass one. And I'm working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to try to build support for that.
Do you think the President of the United States, the leader of the Democratic Party, should ask Congress to do so? On this day, it's interesting. He called on countries and communities around the world to explicitly, forcefully, consistently reject the ideology of al-Qaeda and ISIL, but he hasn't called on Congress to vote on his military action to defeat ISIS.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the president's responsibility. Look, the legislative branch, Congress, House, and Senate, has been widely and loudly complaining for a long time that the president has usurped our authority in a variety of different ways. We can act. We don't need the president to ask us. There is no reason on earth that the legislative branch can't stand up for itself and act. The president has to do what he needs to do as commander-in-chief to protect us. He can't ask Congress and then have Congress do nothing and delay necessary action. Congress can do this. We don't need the president to ask, and I think we should. We should exercise our legislative authority.
It's a great point. You don't need him to ask, but he is not asking, and Congress is not acting. So right now, neither side is really stepping up.
Yeah.
Congressman,
well, no, that's not true, actually. The president is absolutely stepping up. I mean, you saw a speech in the UN. You've seen what's happened in Syria and Iraq. He's absolutely stepping up and confronting this challenge.
In terms of action in the Middle East, absolutely. In terms of congressional authorization and what goes on domestically in the United States in terms of building support, I think you could make the case he's not doing everything he can to get congressional action. But let me leave that aside for just a moment here, because what we have now seen over the last 30 hours are the beginning of airstrikes in Syria. We know what's happening on the ground now. The president has told us what the end game is, to degrade or destroy ISIS. The question is now, what happens in the middle? How do you get from today to that end game? How do you go from the bombing to completely destroying or degrading ISIS?
The great difficulty and the key to that success is building local support. And while it's certainly encouraging that Jordan, UAE, Saudi Arabia, other countries have been supportive of what we've done. We have built an Arab coalition for the bombing. That is just a tiny little step forward. What we really need is we need the Sunni tribes in Iraq to support the Iraqi government against ISIS. That's not yet happening. As bad as Maliki was as a prime minister in terms of forcing Sunnis out, the jury is still out on his successor, al-Badi. There is still concern that not enough has been done to present a truly inclusive government that would bring those Sunni tribes back. That has to happen. We will not be successful unless the Sunni tribes turn on ISIS, and they won't do that if they don't think the Iraqi government's going to include them. In Syria, a very similar challenge. We need moderate elements from the Free Syria movement that we can fight with. Right now, Assad is being just, fiendishly clever in that he focuses his attacks on those moderate elements. In many instances, he's left ISIS alone precisely because he knows that the real threat to his regime is if a moderate element emerges that we can support. So we've got a long way to go to build a successful coalition. But this is where it had to start. There's just much more work to be done.
Congressman, I really appreciate your time and your patience waiting with us here as the president gave that speech, that big speech in front of the United Nations and really the world. We do appreciate your time, sir. And good luck getting Congress to come back and vote.
Thank you.
Ahead for us at this